Two Canadians sold air in plastic bags on eBay in 2014. The first bag was bought for 99 cents. The second reached 168 Canadian dollars. In 3 years, they made millions selling something you're breathing for free right now. But this isn't a story about creative entrepreneurship. It's about the moment humanity turned oxygen into a commodity, and no one noticed we'd crossed a dangerous line. Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. A ski resort in the Rocky Mountains. Moses Lamb and Troy Paquette, two former real estate professionals, gaze at the crystal clear air around them and have an idea that sounds like a joke. They fill plastic bags with air and post them on eBay. It's December of 2014. The first buyer pays less than $1. They laugh. They post another. The bidding begins. The price climbs. $10, $50, $100. It stops at 168 Canadian dollars. In that moment, they understood something fundamental about the modern economy. Value is not an intrinsic property of things, but a construction based on perceived scarcity and manufactured desire. The air they breathed for free had, for someone, somewhere, a price. In early 2015, Vitality Air becomes a real company. They develop pressurized canisters, create a brand, and establish capture and bottling processes. Each canister contains 3 or 8 liters of Rocky Mountain air and sells for up to $20 US. The product is advertised as pure Canadian air. The maple leaf symbol is stamped on the package. It's not just air. It's a promise, a status, a fantasy of purity. But who buys canned air? The answer arrived in December 2015, when Vitality Air shipped its first international order. Destination: Beijing, China. 500 cans. The country was under one of the worst smog alerts in recent history. On the streets of the Chinese capital, people wore masks. Schools canceled classes. Visibility was measured in meters. Fine particle levels exceeded by 20 times the threshold, considered safe by the World Health Organization. The 500 cans sold out in 1 week. Moses Lamb received immediate requests for thousands more. Time magazine ran the story. Fortune did too. Suddenly, Vitality Air was no longer a quirky startup from Edmonton. It was a global phenomenon exposing an open wound of modern civilization. In 2016, the company expanded to Mexico, Vietnam, and Russia. In 2017, they entered India, Delhi, Bengaluru, Mumbai cities, suffocated under a gray layer of industrial and automotive pollution. The 8-liter bottles sold for 2,000 Indian rupees, about $30 US. Each can offered 160 breaths of pure air. 160 inhalations of something that should be a basic human right. By November of 2017, Vitality Air had sold over 200,000 cans. Almost all orders came from regions with critical air pollution levels: China, India, Vietnam, Russia, Turkey, Iraq, Kuwait. The company was making more than $300,000 a year. Moses Lamb gave interviews to The Guardian, talking about international logistics, export taxes, and market strategies. But here's what no one asked in those celebratory interviews. What does it mean to live in a world where breathing has become a luxury product? And it's exactly at this point that the narrative turns. Because the story of Vitality Air isn't about entrepreneurial genius. It's about the invisible architecture of global environmental inequality. Beijing, 2015. 4,000 people die every day in China due to air pollution. It's not an abstract number. It's the equivalent of a 9/11 happening every single day silently in the lungs of 1.6 million people per year. That represents 17% of all deaths in the country. Berkeley Earth, an environmental research organization, calculated that 38% of China's population lives in areas where fine particle concentration exceeds all safety standards. Breathing air in cities like Shanghai or Guangzhou is equivalent to smoking 1.5 cigarettes per hour constantly, without pause. The origin of this catastrophe is well known. Rapid industrialization based on coal, uncontrolled urban growth, massive fleets of combustion vehicles, and decades without strict environmental regulation. China became the factory of the world, and the price was paid by its people's lungs. India followed a similar path. Delhi often ranks as the most polluted capital on the planet. Meanwhile, in Edmonton, in the preserved forests of Canada, Moses Lamb and Troy Paquette breathe freely. They capture that air, can it, and export it halfway across the world. The contrast is brutal. On one side, nations suffering the environmental externalities of global production. On the other, countries that preserve their ecosystems, and now turn that preservation into an exportable commodity. This is the geopolitics of oxygen. Clean air is distributed across the planet following the same lines of power and wealth that define all other forms of inequality. Forests, national parks, strict environmental regulations, energy transition, all of that costs money and political will. Rich countries can afford to breathe. Late industrializing countries accumulate pollution while manufacturing products for export. And Vitality Air is just the most visible symptom of this distortion. The company didn't invent the problem, it monetized it. It turned a public health crisis into a business opportunity. And here's the most disturbing part. Many Chinese and Indian consumers who bought the cans knew it wasn't a real solution. Reports show the product worked more as a luxury gift, a curiosity, a status symbol. It was the theatricalization of environmental inequality, paying high prices for 160 breaths of Canadian air, while outside, millions suffocated for free. The maple leaf logo on the cans wasn't just branding. It was soft power made tangible. The brand Canada meant purity, preserved nature, quality of life. Consumers weren't just buying air. They were buying the fantasy of belonging, even if only for 160 breaths, to a world where breathing wasn't a problem. They were buying the temporary illusion of escaping the geography they were born into. Moses Lam once said in interviews that Canadians found the idea absurd, something everyone has for free. But for consumers in Beijing or Delhi, the absurdity was different. Living in cities where stepping outside without a mask meant risking your health. What's free in Edmonton has a price elsewhere. And that price reveals who pays to keep the global economy's gears turning. But the real question still hasn't been asked. And it leads us to the final chapter of this story. London, Imperial College. Dr. Sarah Elkin is shown the story of Vitality Air. Her response is direct. There's no scientific evidence of any real benefit for consumers. Geneva, headquarters of the World Health Organization. Maria Nera, Director of Public Health, is even more blunt. Selling canned air is a sophisticated ad hoc product that encourages acceptance of pollution as normality. For her, the only sustainable solution is to guarantee clean air for everyone, not just for those who can pay. The criticism exposes the ethical core of the issue. Vitality Air doesn't solve the environmental crisis. On the contrary, it normalizes dystopia. It turns a systemic failure into an individual consumption opportunity. Every can sold is an implicit acceptance that clean air is no longer a right but a privilege. And privileges, by definition, aren't universal. This logic isn't new. It's the same logic that turns drinking water into bottled product, while entire populations face water scarcity. It's the one that creates gated communities with private security, while urban violence devastates peripheral neighborhoods. It's the one that offers elite education and healthcare, while public systems collapse. The privatization of basic resources is the signature of our era. And here's the deeper truth the story of Vitality Air reveals. We're normalizing the idea that individual, market-based solutions can replace structural public policy. We don't need to cut carbon emissions, regulate polluting industries, or invest in renewables. We just need to buy a can of pure air. We don't need an energy transition, just enough money to escape its consequences. The company diversified its catalog. It began selling oxygen for athletes. It still operates in luxury niches. But its most important legacy isn't in the millions made or the 200,000 cans sold. It's in the question the company asks without asking. How long until breathing freely becomes definitively a class privilege? Chinese artists have already grasped the symbolic dimension of the problem. Photographer and performance artist Liu Bolin walked the streets of Beijing in 2013, wearing a vest equipped with smartphones, streaming live the experience of breathing smog. The artist, known as Brother Nut, inhaled polluted air for 100 days, condensed the dust into a brick, and exhibited it as protest. Zhao Yi photographed the view from his Beijing window daily, creating a visual archive of atmospheric decay. These performances weren't art for art's sake, they were alarms. Because air pollution isn't just a mortality statistic, it's a reconfiguration of basic human experience. It's the transformation of something automatic and unconscious breathing into a conscious and dangerous act. It's the colonization of the body by a degraded environment. And when that environment becomes unbearable for some but not for others, we create a new form of segregation, the geography of breathing. Vitality Air was born as a joke in 2014. It became a symbol in 2017. And today, in 2025, it's a prophecy. Every can sold is a reminder that the dystopian future we imagined has already arrived. It didn't come with a bang, but with the quiet sound of a can being opened, 160 breaths consumed, and the inevitable return to the unbreathable air that was always there. The question isn't whether we should blame Moses Lamb and Troy Paquette for seeing a market opportunity. The question is, why the market was there waiting, why the demand existed, why millions in Beijing, Delhi, and Mumbai were willing to pay $30 for 160 temporary breaths of relief. The answer lies in the invisible architecture of the system. We've built a system where environmental externalities can be ignored while profits are privatized, where pollution is an acceptable externality and clean air a scarce commodity, where the solution to collective crises is always individual consumption. And while we celebrate the entrepreneurial genius of turning air into a product, while we applaud the ability to spot market niches and export to polluted nations, no one asks the essential question: what kind of civilization sells the right to breathe? Vitality Air isn't an aberration, it's a mirror. And the reflection it shows is terrifying. A humanity that has normalized the idea that life's basic resources can be turned into commodities accessible only to those with money. It shows that dystopia doesn't arrive with a dramatic announcement, but through the gradual normalization of the unacceptable. Every can sold isn't a victory of entrepreneurship. It's a defeat of civilization. And the most disturbing part? We're still buying.